Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, episode 14. I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda, and we're your hosts.
We are the hosts of this podcast. And today we're talking about Cambodia.
Yeah, we're off to Siem Reap, the temples of Angkor, and Phnom Penh.
So to start with, how did we get to Cambodia?
So we were coming from Bangkok. So we caught a bus out of Bangkok to the border town of Pratha, and then we crossed into the Cambodian city of Poi Phet.
Yeah, and it was quite the experience crossing the border.
It was. Did you want to share a little bit from your journal about what you wrote at that time?
Sure. So this is what I wrote in my journal at the time. I'm glad we were well prepared for the Cambodian border. From the bus stop, you need to get a tuk-tuk to the border, and the guy originally told us the price was 1,500 baht, before saying 50 after we declined. The tuk-tuks take you to a fake Cambodian visa office where they're trying to overcharge dramatically for visas. We said no and walked the rest of the way to the border. The Thai side of the border is fairly modern and streamlined, but once you get to the Cambodian side, there's a lot of chaos. There are people telling you where to go and what to do, but you don't really know who to trust. The visa people try to overcharge with a ridiculous exchange rate, and there's a very sketchy health checkpoint. Although I think it is run by some scammers. Hopefully they don't do anything with the info we gave them. There is a free shuttle to the transportation center that the government has set up to monopolize travel to Siem Reap from the border. We had met two people along the way and split a cab with them, which cost $12 each. The drive into Siem Reap was eye-opening and sketchy at best. Cambodian drivers don't really use the lanes or follow normal passing rules as we see them here in North America. They use whatever speed they please and don't slow down if they catch a car, or more likely a motorcycle. Sometimes cars go three wide in one direction, passing each other, and they honk to let each other know they are there instead of the way we honk at home. We saw families of 3 or 4 on mopeds overloaded with stuff, including pigs, trucks with 8 feet high of stuff and multiple people on top of that stuff, as well as trucks with 10 to 15 people in the bed. This is definitely a third world country. I was shocked and almost disappointed to see the luxury hotels when we entered Siem Reap. I was definitely out of my comfort zone the first night there. Fear, remorse, pity, and plenty of other emotions were making me uneasy at being here.
Thanks for sharing. I really enjoyed hearing that, and hopefully our listeners do as well. So hopefully you guys can take away from that our recommendation is to be prepared when you go across that border. And we are going to put a link onto a resource called travelfish.org, which we used in preparation for a lot of our travels in Southeast Asia. And it has some good resources for finding out information about that specific border crossing between Thailand and Cambodia.
Yeah, because there's a lot of scams and deceptions, but thankfully the scammers aren't super creative and they seem to stay the same over the periods of time. So we basically knew in advance exactly what was going to happen. We weren't sure, but what we experienced was almost exactly word for word what we had read. There was still some stuff that was kind of surprising. Like we went through this health checkpoint that didn't really seem real. One of the guys we went with had just taken the stance that he wasn't going to stop for anyone or trust anyone, and he just walked through all the Cambodian border stuff. But we gave them our information, and I don't know whatever happened to it. And another interesting and just bizarre thing is you walk into the Cambodian border office and they've got the price posted on a big sign right above where the visa people are standing. And then they tell you that the price is more than it is on the sign directly above their heads. It's just such a corrupt country. I think it's number 160 out of 177 in the Transparency International Corruption Index. So it's just corruption everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. And you can really see that as a traveler backpacking through the country.
Yeah. And I mean, as a traveler, corruption, it's a terrible thing. But if you have money, it doesn't influence you as much as if you don't. So as a backpacker, when you pay those corruption fees, you still just get on your way.
Yeah, definitely. So we were both pretty relieved and happy to arrive in Siem Reap, and we were staying at a pretty nice hostel called the Golden Mango. There was a lot of resorts in Siem Reap, as Ryan mentioned from what he'd written in his journal. So we stayed in a place that we found on Hostel World that was better than your average hostel, but still very affordable.
Yeah, I'd call it more of a guest house than that would kind of be what I'd say it is.
Yeah, definitely.
Restaurant. Do you want to talk about what you were feeling at being in Cambodia? Because it's by far the poorest place we've ever been to. Actually, I don't know if that's true. At the time, it was the poorest country we'd ever been to.
Yeah. I was definitely out of my comfort zone. I felt a lot of guilt for being there as a traveler. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I wrote in my journal is that if I went back to Cambodia, I'd want to go and volunteer to be able to make a difference. My stance on that is different now. I don't think I would go back there to volunteer. But I don't know. I felt a lot of guilt being there.
Do you think it's that you're there for your own personal enjoyment, and then you look around and you see all these people really struggling, and it's like, well, I don't have the right to enjoy things when these people can barely afford to live.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, we went out for a few nice dinners and we paid 10 US or Canadian dollars for these fancy meals, and knowing that, some people they live off about $2 US a day was astounding to me, because 10 US dollars a day, or 10 US dollars for one meal between the two of us is nothing. Mm-hmm. It's nothing for me, even as a backpacker. So there was I had a lot of guilt. Same as you, driving into Siem Reap from the border crossing. Just so many eye-opening things that I'd never seen in my life before.
Yeah.
Like families packed on mopeds and so many people packed in the back of trucks. It was very eye-opening.
Yeah, it's so chaotic. You're driving by the side of the road, and the gas stations are like people with bottles of gasoline.
Yeah, it just stands with a bunch of, it looks like massive bottles of Coke, but filled with gasoline. Because
most people are using mopeds, and the mopeds just have so much stuff. Like we saw one, he had a stack of probably like 4 dead pigs on the back of his moped. It's crazy. Small trucks just piled high, like to the roof with stuff. Like it looks like an IKEA commercial, except there's like kids sitting on top of the pile. I don't know if they're like the weights to keep stuff down, or like that's the only place for them to sit, but it's craziness.
Yeah, probably a combination of both of those things, I would think.
So the thing to do in Siem Reap is the temples of Angkor.
Yeah, so we booked a sort of, I guess, private tour with a tuk-tuk driver for the 2 days that we were in Siem Reap.
But booked is a lot of the way the tuk-tuk drivers operate there is they take you on a short trip, and then they try to sell you on showing you around the entire time you're there, taking you to the temples. Our car ride in from the border dropped us off somewhere. We had to take a tuk-tuk, which they told us would be free. Then he tried to charge us money afterwards. And then he was like, oh, I'll take you tomorrow to see the temples. And we agreed to it, even though it didn't really make us feel comfortable.
Yeah, I'd kind of forgotten about how that had happened.
A lot of the tuk-tuk drivers pressure you in, or put some pressure on you to take a tour with them.
Yeah, it is. It's a difficult situation. There are a few different ways to see the temples of Angkor. You can rent bikes and do it that way. Most people do tuk-tuks just because it is really large area.
And really hot.
Very hot and very humid. Very exhausting. And so what were your impressions of the temples of Angkor?
I think I didn't know much about it going in. I knew hardly anything about Cambodia in general, but I don't think I'd heard of the temples of Angkor ever. So just driving up and being kind of astounded at how big and spectacular this whole temple complex was.
Yeah, so for other people who are in the same boat as, or who are in the same boat as us and have no idea about the temples of Angkor, it's an archaeological park with the remains of several different capitals from the Khmer Empire. And they were from the 9th and 15th centuries.
9th to 15th?
I read that it was the 9th and the 15th because I think in the early years they were based on Hindu symbolism is how they were developed. And then in the 15th century, they built up a lot more and changed a lot more of the stuff to be more Buddhist. And the reason why there's so many temples is because the kings back there all wanted a temple to signify their capital. So I think a good way to think about it is these people have these small villages, a bunch of small villages, and then these kings are like, okay, we need a temple to show off our village. And so visiting there is kind of visiting all these different capitals, these different areas, and seeing all the different temples that were developed there.
Yeah, and I think when they discovered it, because the area is pretty dense, so it was covered a lot in jungle, a lot of the stuff, and some of it was just being farmed, and then people started kind of pulling back and finding more and more and more and more stuff, and it's just this massive area with so many different cool things to see. Different temples, all kind of similar but unique in a lot of ways.
What was your favorite one? You liked the Temple of Bayon, didn't you? The faces?
Yeah. That one carved into stone on this kind of raised platform. There's these gigantic stone faces. It's just amazing. We'll definitely have lots of photos from the temples of Angkor on our show notes on theworldwanderers.com. But yeah, just so many spectacular things, but that was probably my favorite.
Yeah. And for people who are going to go to Cambodia and see the temples of Angkor, we're going to post a link to some resources so you can read a little bit more about them because they are really interesting. And one thing that I do regret about our time there is that going over to Asia, it's like, okay, what are the things to see? Okay, Angkor Wat, that's a big tourist thing. Okay, let's go do that. And then we're knee deep in it. And it's like, what is this? What is this thing that we're seeing?
Yeah, it's definitely a regret for me too. With historical sites like that, if you don't have the context, you lose so much about it. And we were looking at it and it's beautiful, but we don't know how old it is, really any of the information. And our tuk-tuk driver didn't speak much English at all, so he couldn't really give us any information other than the name of it. So afterwards, I did some reading, but I still don't know that much about it.
I know a little bit because I did research for this, but still, it's hard to read a bunch about something that you've already seen, if that makes sense. You know, it's kind of like, okay, I've already seen it. I don't have plans to go back right now. Like, I'm interested in it, but I don't want to scour.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to read a big book about it or scour website after website.
Yeah. I would definitely go back again.
Oh, 100%.
And if you're into photography, that Angkor Wat, you'd be in heaven. In some ways, in the photography area. But it isn't all pleasurable there. There's a lot of sadness that comes along with it. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so there were families that were living there, and when it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the families were actually kicked off of their land or asked to leave their land. And so there's
asked might be a little nice. They were removed. They took the land away.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of children who are selling everything from like postcards to sunglasses to just begging for money. And they're small, they're barely walking, but they'll follow you for a kilometer or two. Just like, hey, mister, hey, missus, can I have money? Buy my postcard. It's sad. I just put my sunglasses on and, you know, I'm tearing up because it's just breaking my heart that these small children are in this situation and they're begging for money. And this is the life that they're living, and there's nothing that I can do about it.
Yeah.
Because buying their postcard isn't helping the problem.
Yeah.
Isn't a solution to the problem.
the temples of Angkor, it's I guess a national park or something. But Cambodia is such a corrupt country that you pay an entrance fee. I think it was like $35 or something, quite expensive, given the comparable value of that money in Cambodia. And none of that money is going to the local people. It's just going in the pockets of the politicians who control it. And then you go out to see these things, and they're spectacular, amazing things. But as you're walking around, you're kind of so sad because you're having to say no and being hassled by all these kids who want you to buy their stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's tough because if you buy from one child, the other children pick up on that. Oh, they have money, they'll buy something, and you'll be followed even further by them. And they can say like, hi, buy this in like English, French, Spanish, German.
All the numbers.
They can count to 10 in all those different languages. And it shows how, willing to learn and how intelligent children are. And it's just so sad that the way these children are learning is not in a productive way.
Mm-hmm.
They're learning these things and then they're going out and begging. And it was really heartbreaking for me.
Yeah. And it does, like when we were talking about feeling guilty at being somewhere for your own personal enjoyment and contrasting that against all these people who are really struggling to survive in a lot of ways. And that brings on guilt. Do you think that guilt comes from a good place?
No, I don't. Do you?
Or where do you think that guilt comes from?
That's a good question. I'm not too sure. Are you able to pinpoint it?
Well, I think that it comes from like not kind of fundamentally believing in your own having a right to be happy.
Yeah.
Like you can't live your life being unhappy because others are happy, or being ashamed of enjoying yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And I spent a lot of time. I kind of always had the mindset of, oh, I need to finish this food. Like there's people starving in Africa. Like I'm so lucky that I have this. I should finish it. When it's like throwing out my scraps in the garbage doesn't change the situation, or not throwing out scraps in the garbage doesn't change the situation in another country.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people would take the view that what happened with the government taking all these people off the land to make it a national park where tourists come in, and then the government can siphon all of this money off of tourists. People take the viewpoint of you shouldn't go there at all. You shouldn't support that. And I definitely can see that logic. But that said, by going there and spending your money at the stands and the restaurants and stuff, you are supporting the people. Except it's tough in a place that corrupt, because those people probably have to pay bribes to all the officials to just even operate on that land. So I don't really know what the answer is there, if it is ethical to go.
Yeah, I'm not too sure either. And I think that's where a lot of my struggles came from. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable physically in the country. And then I'm uncomfortable emotionally because I don't know how to process this guilt and deal with it. And I don't know how to put my money out there in a way that's going to help the citizens who need the help. Like, because I just don't know.
When it's so corrupt, your money is going to go to, a percentage of the money you're paying everywhere is going to go to feed the corruption.
Yeah. And it's tough too, because, even those people that run the food stands, then it's, that concern of, I don't want to get sick because we're in the middle of nowhere. And is this food hygienic for me? And then it's this toss up between, do I just put myself out there and really try to put my money in the right place and have this really authentic experience and enjoy this authentic food? Or do I risk getting really sick in an uncomfortable situation? And so that was another sort of struggle, because Cambodia does have a lot of food hygiene problems, especially if you're in the middle of nowhere, which the temples of Angkor essentially are.
Yeah, they wouldn't have infrastructure to get clean water and things like that in there.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But then afterwards, you kind of lose those memories of the uncomfortable stuff.
Yeah, so thinking about Angkor Wat, just if you were to think about it talking to a friend, like, what are your memories? Are your memories really happy from it or positive?
The things I focus on, because the way I operated then was to really run away from uncomfortable memories. Mm-hmm. So what kind of sealed in my mind was, the really nice stuff. And I look at the photos and I'm like, this is a spectacular thing to have seen.
Yeah, for sure.
But at the time, it was like, there's a lot of moments where you can't really appreciate it because of the uncomfortableness.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I tell people about the situation, I focus on how beautiful it was and how much I enjoyed seeing the temples themselves. But when I really think about my experiences there, I was very uncomfortable. I was sad. I felt a lot of guilt. And those are all sort of, they took away from this positive experience that I convey to people. Like, if somebody's like, oh, Cambodia, like, go to temples of Angkor, like, they're amazing. I don't tell somebody, like, go to the temples of Angkor, but be prepared to feel really sad when you see all the children begging. Mm-hmm. I just say they're really beautiful. You have to go see them. So It's interesting the way you come away with those memories.
Yeah, I find in general, in places like that are sketchy, less developed, those happy memories stay with you. You don't remember like having the shits in like this disgusting toilet and feeling sick and being overheating. You look at the photos of like the good times, and that's what sticks with you.
Yeah. I think knowing that makes me more inclined to really like put myself in those uncomfortable situations, because as uncomfortable as I may be at the time, I know that I'm going to come away with something that's really great.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
Yeah, and it's a learning experience too.
Yeah.
So the uncomfortable situations didn't really stop in Siem Reap. They kind of continued. It's like the theme of Cambodia. We went from doing the temples of Angkor, I don't know which one it is. We took a bus to Phnom Penh, which I'd say is the scariest bus ride of my life.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we were there during monsoon flood season. While we were at the temples of Angkor, we got beautiful sunny days, but there was a few temples we couldn't really go to because they were flooded in. And on the way to Phnom Penh, you drive across quite a few big floodplains, and the highway is this raised thing. Either side is kind of floodplains out into the distance. And it was just pouring rain, raining so hard that all the windows on the bus looked like waterfalls coming down, not like with the pitter patter of raindrops hitting them, waterfalls rushing down the sides. The windows were leaking. And the road we were on had only one paved lane and then one lane mud. And like I mentioned, when you're driving in, the rules of the road there, the best analogy I heard about driving, walking, anything in Asia is that people move like water. You don't stop and start, slow down. Everyone just moves at the speed they're going and tries to avoid each other. So we're in a bus moving down this one lane highway. There's buses coming the other way. There's waterfalls running down all the windows on the bus. And the bus will just move off into the muddy dirt on the side without slowing down at all, and then back into the lane, and then passing people. It's one lane. There's cars coming the other direction, and we're trying to pass people in a gigantic bus, driving probably like 100 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. I was just like, it's hard because in those situations, your instinct is to watch, but it is a lot better when you can just like close your eyes, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of wish I was sleeping through that. Like thinking about that makes my physical body tense right now. Like I can feel like the tension and anxiety from that memory. Like I just remember thinking like I could die on this bus ride. And that's not an exaggeration. It's like I could die today. Like in the next few hours, like my life could be over.
Yeah, a friend of mine was telling me a story about a friend of his who had been to Asia, got into a bus crash in Cambodia. The bus rolled over. Came down with a back injury, immediately flew home, kind of just on his own. He didn't go to a hospital there. Immediately went to a hospital. Once he arrived back in Vancouver, they x-rayed. He'd broken his back.
It's so scary.
And I think like bus crashes are a big cause of deaths for backpackers, travelers, and of course local people, because a lot of the tourist buses are nicer and better than the ones the locals use.
Yeah, I mean, we paid for the nicer buses, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And it is like we've talked about it in the Lao episode about how being safe, you think, why do these drivers drive so fast, so recklessly? And it is in those countries, in a lot of poor countries in general, there's really no one wants to take self-responsibility. And to be safe is to take responsibility. They have, a bus schedule. And if they're over the schedule, they have to take responsibility for that. Oh, you were late. It's like, well, I was late because it was torrential rains and it wasn't safe to drive any slower or any faster. But that's an area where you'd have to take responsibility. So they instead just recklessly move ahead because they can't afford to lose their jobs, because there's no other jobs to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So we get to Phnom Penh, get off the bus, and
pretty shaken up. I think it's fair to say that we're fairly like, what just happened?
And getting off of a tourist bus in Asia in general, but specifically Cambodia, is not a calming experience.
No, it's more overwhelming than being on the bus.
Yeah.
So there's so many tuk-tuk drivers shouting at us, like, come with me, like I drive you where you want. And it's just like, oh God, like this whole process again. Okay, we have to barter. Let's get a good price. Like, you have to be assertive. And at the time, you and I were not very assertive people. So it's like, no, I'm not paying that. And it's hard when you're kind of like, I just don't want to deal with this because I don't have that assertive element in my personality right now. I don't have that confidence to be assertive.
Yeah, you have to be assertive and you have to be on and prepared for it. So I wish if I could go back now, I would say, don't rush to get off the bus. But it's kind of, you have to, get off the bus to make sure your bags are safe. That's another concern. You're like, okay, get my bags safely into my possession and then move on to the next one of getting where I need to go. And when you have 15 or so tuk-tuk drivers harassing you, it's very stressful. So I would say, as you pulling into the bus station, take some deep breaths, kind of prepare yourself for the experience before you get off the bus. And then get off the bus and find a driver. But we ended up getting lured in by a guy who had a sign saying, Peter is the best driver in Cambodia. So he seemed pretty legit.
Yeah, he was a fairly interesting person. He spoke pretty good English for people in Cambodia, and we're like, okay, good price, guy speaks English, he's got this sign, like he can probably get us to where we need to be safely. And
he had a book with other travelers had written reviews of him in, which it helped us make a decision.
Yeah, definitely. So we took the tuk-tuk with him to our hostel, and then on the way, as we found was typical to Cambodia, he's convincing us to go on this tour with him for the following day so that we can, see the killing fields and the S-21 prison camp.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so tuk-tuk drivers trying to sell you on tours is common, and also hotels and places like that. They all have, they're going to get a couple bucks back if they take you to certain hotels. So People will tell you that your hotel's closed now, that your reservation won't be good. You got to go to this one. So that's why we found it so helpful to already have stuff booked there.
It's like, no, I have a reservation here. Like, you need to take us there.
Yeah, so we did book on to do a tour with Peter the following day. And when we arrived at our hostel, we kind of encountered another new surprise.
Yeah, so we booked a place on Hostelworld, and it didn't have the best Hostelworld reviews, but it was our pick in Lonely Planet. So I was like, you know what? Lonely Planet says it's good. It's probably fine. The people who wrote on Hostelworld, it's probably, not that accurate. I don't know if you can see what's happening in that decision making, but it's clearly very flawed because Hostelworld is much more recent than Lonely Planet. And This was definitely, Hostelworld was completely right over Lonely Planet.
And it's one of the big lessons we learned. The comments we're referring to is someone had written about bed bugs a couple weeks before. And we were like, you know what? It's probably one bed and it's probably been fixed.
Or it's probably fine. They saw a spider and were like, oh, there's bed bugs.
Yeah. So we went and there were bed bugs. And that from that point on, if we see a review saying bed bugs, we steer clear of that hostel if it's like within the last couple months.
Yeah. We saw reviews like that traveling through South America. And, the hostel would comment on that being like, we've dealt with this. And I'm like, no, you had bed bugs last week. Like, I will absolutely not stay there. I'm just not doing it because we took that risk before and we had a bad experience and we had 2 very, very awful sleeps and it just wasn't worth it.
And the reason we probably would have left, but we showed up, it was the afternoon and we had to get Vietnam visas. So our hotel offered to do it for us. They take our passports and they're off. We went into our room and didn't see any bed bugs on our bed. Then we went out, did our thing, came back. It's like 9:00 at night. And we find bed bugs in our bed. So we're like, well, shit, we can't really leave because our hotel has our passports and it's late. We don't really want to go wandering about Phnom Penh to find a new hotel. So we go downstairs and the office is closed now. And there's a guy just like sleeping on the porch of this building.
Yeah, he's got a mosquito net over him and he's sleeping on like a blanket on the cement.
And we're like, oh, there's bed bugs in our bed. And he's like, doesn't know what bed bugs are. Like he's sleeping on the porch and we're complaining about bed bugs in the bed. This is another kind of guilt overwhelming our abilities to get what we need situation.
Yeah. So at this point I'm like, oh, well now I feel really bad that I'm complaining about these bugs that we see in the bed when this guy is like sleeping on the ground. He's probably like, bugs, like, why are you bothered by bugs? Like they're part of nature. Like I'm sleeping outside. Bugs are fine. And we're just feeling like overwhelmed, guilty. So we're in our sleep sheets, don't want to roll around because we don't want to get bit by bugs.
Yeah. So what we did, we had those kind of sleeping bag sheets that are common for travelers. And we had shaken off our mattress, hoping to get all the bed bugs out, bundled up in those sheets so there wasn't much exposed skin, and just kind of had this sleep where it was like, oh, being paranoid about things biting us.
Probably one of the worst sleeps I've ever had, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, and then thankfully we both avoided getting bed bugs.
Yeah, we were fine in the end. So the following day, Peter Cambodia picked us up.
Peter Cambodia.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Cambodia is actually his last name. Peter's probably not also his first name.
Yeah, I don't think that's his name at all, but we'll call him Peter Cambodia because...
And the cool thing is that's what his name is on Facebook. So you can add him on Facebook. And if you're going to Phnom Penh, we'd both... He's not amazing, but he's trustworthy.
Yeah, so he'd actually set up a tour with another 2 people as well. So we were in his tuk-tuk and they had a different tuk-tuk driver, but we would all stop together so he could explain things to us because his English was pretty good. And so he took us out to the killing fields, which was, once again, didn't know anything about Cambodia. So I also didn't know anything about the Khmer Rouge and the rule of Pol Pot. Did you know much?
No, it's something I hadn't learned about at all. So we showed up in Cambodia, and that was the first time I'd ever heard about it, which is shocking because it's something that happened not too far away. Pretty conservative estimates have 1.5 to 2 million people being murdered by the Khmer Rouge regime. So just a horrible, horrible, horrible atrocity. And, nothing is taught or told about it.
Yeah. So basically in 1975, around the time of the Vietnam War, there was 2 to 3 million people, most of whom were refugees who came to Phnom Penh. And in the earlier years, Phnom Penh was known as the royal capital or the Pearl of Asia. So it was a really, it was talked about as a really beautiful city. And then Pol Pot came to rule and the Khmer Rouge, and basically there was a lot of like random deaths and mutilation of millions of trapped citizens. And then Pol Pot opened up, he converted the Tool Slang High School into the S-21 prison camp where people were tortured and killed, and basically anyone who was educated, lazy, or considered to be a political enemy was taken to this camp and tortured, and then they would take them out to the killing fields and proceed to kill them if they were not willing to cooperate.
Well, even if they were, I think one of the most horrific things about it was reading about how they would torture people until they felt like they had got them to see things their way, and then they'd kill them afterwards. It was, if you've read 1984, it seems like that's what Pol Pot was using as his instruction manual. Where you torture people until they give up everything about themselves, and then you kill them afterwards because that's what you need. And it seems completely pointless, and it's just horrific.
Yeah. And so a few things that hit me pretty hard outside of the fact that this is just it's disturbing and it's awful.
Well, we first want to mention what Pol Pot's philosophy was?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
So Pol Pot was a communist who went to school in Paris with the other group of people who came back to Cambodia to really take over and run the Khmer, or create this Khmer Rouge thing. And they wanted to create a communist agrarian society. So anyone who was educated, all the people living in cities were forced out of the cities into these kind of agrarian communist communities of farming.
Yeah.
It's they wanted to take away all the progress that had been made. Take it back to the Stone Ages.
Yeah, it's terrible. I don't even understand the logic behind
But that's the same
that thinking.
That's the extension of a lot of the logic people use in North America now. A lot of people really criticize developed countries for a lot of things about it was so much better when we lived so much more naturally and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of people who are anti-technology, that is kind of the extension of that line of thinking.
Yeah, in a different sort of way, yeah. Yeah, so, one thing that hit me really hard was that I couldn't believe that I didn't know anything about this.
Mm-hmm.
How are schools in North America not teaching about this? It just seems so awful. And I don't like the feeling of being in the dark with something that happened. If we don't teach people about it, they won't know about it. And it's it didn't happen, but it did happen and it was awful. So shouldn't we be learning about these things to prevent them from happening in the future? I guess is my sort of thinking. And then the other thing that really disturbed me at the time was thinking about, this happened in 1975. My parents were born in the early 60s. So had my parents been living in Asia living in Cambodia or involved in the Vietnam War, like my parents would have been tortured and killed most likely.
Yeah, and that's what Peter, our driver, his dad was an academic. And him and his mother were taken away and sent to one of these farming camps, like forced labor concentration camp, effectively, but they were farming. And he never saw his dad again. So his dad was most likely tortured and murdered.
Yeah. And so going to the killing fields, they have this massive area full of skulls of people who are killed there, which is, I don't even know what the word is to describe the way it made me feel. Like sad, hurt, disturbed, upset. They took us around and showed us the different areas where people were tortured and how they were tortured there. And it was truly hard for me to believe that there is humans out there who are capable of treating other humans that way. It makes me really sad to think that, you know, people have so much pain inside of them that they need to treat other people so horribly.
Yeah. And I don't think the people who end up pulling the trigger, that's a long series of people removing themselves from the responsibility for their actions.
Yeah.
People not, because the people in that situation are really, they're choosing themselves over that person. They believe that if they don't do it, they're going to end up being on the other side. So it's better to survive than to pull the trigger. And they take away the responsibility, saying that, you know, it's orders. I've got to do what I've got to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad that people are in that situation and that, yeah.
And it's weird going there because I think it's called dark tourism. The tourism you'd see concentration camps there, obviously. It's another kind of confusing ethical situation where it's like, is it good that I'm, you know, being a tourist here at this horrific thing? Is it better to not go? Like people who I've always been kind of felt weird towards people who were like, oh, I really want to go to Auschwitz. I really want to go to Dachau.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Dachau, and I would like to see Auschwitz. I'm just trying to think of what draws me to want to go there. And I think it's wanting to learn about what's happened in this world because, you know, I don't want to live my life just pretending like bad things don't happen. You know, like there's a reason, like I don't like watching the news because I find that the news is all the bad things in the world. And I like to believe that there is good in the world. And so, you know, that sort of mindset prevents me from feeling this sadness, and it lets me pretend like the world is just great, which it's not. There's a lot of awful things out there. There's a lot of awful people. And I think it's important to acknowledge those things and just be okay with the emotions that they evoke in you. You know, it's okay to feel sadness, to know that, you know, human beings are treated really poorly.
Mm-hmm. So you think that by having them there and having people go to them, that people will learn from them?
I'd like to think so.
Do you think that people do?
I think some people do. I'm not certain that all people do.
Because I think with the horrible atrocities and the tourist sites around them, a lot of them are used as a way to kind of further propaganda for certain groups.
Yeah, there's that possibility.
Because I think in Cambodia, and then we saw something similar in Vietnam where it was, yes, horrible things have happened, and there's many sides who are responsible for it, but now the one side who's taken power after the side who was responsible for that is like, look how bad these guys are. Look what they did.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, atrocities still go on.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think, if you're talking to someone who's going to Phnom Penh, what do you tell them about going to the killing fields, going to S21 prison?
I think I would probably tell them to go and see it. Like, it's a big part of the history there, and to just simply go to the Royal Palace, which we did after the killing fields, which kind of...
Yeah, it's very surreal. Phnom Penh, I'd never been anywhere where all the SUVs have the name brands of the thing plastered on the side. It's a very like showy culture. The rich people are like very, look at this, I'm rich, you're not.
Yeah.
Like the Lexus SUVs with gigantic Lexus signs on the sides. It's bizarre.
The income disparity is very clear.
Going through this situation where you're looking at these horrible atrocities, and then you go to the Royal Palace at the end, and you're like it's shocking. And it's just bizarre. It's like, is this real? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, and I struggled with how can I enjoy myself now? Like, I've just seen this horrible stuff, and I'm still processing how it makes me feel emotionally. And now I'm looking at this palace, which is really beautiful and shows this good time that was in Phnom Penh, when Phnom Penh was the royal capital and this place that people came to. And it's like, am I allowed to enjoy this when this city has all this, since the royal palace has this tragic history? Like, can I go for dinner and enjoy this meal? Can I spend this money when people can't afford these things? There was a lot of that for me on that day and in that city. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that as well?
Yeah, in that time period at 21, I was very out of touch with my emotions and feelings. And so going through this, I'm feeling a lot of things, and I'm like, I don't know what any of this stuff is. I don't know what these feelings are. Like, I just need these to go away.
Yeah, and it's like, how do I process this? Like, this is a foreign feeling to me.
Yeah, because I think feelings kind of evoke thinking, and a lot of people are uncomfortable with thinking, and I was kind of uncomfortable with it at that period of time.
Yeah, I think I was the same way, 21, 22 years old. I was very out of touch with who I am, who I was. I don't know how to feel, I know I'm feeling sadness. I know that this is wrong, but I don't really know how to process this and deal with it while being here.
Yeah. And so I think in general that when you go somewhere and you kind of feel guilty at being there, you feel anxious about being there, those feelings need to be followed up with thinking, why do I feel this way? Is it valid? If it's not valid, if it's valid, I need you to act on it. If it's not valid, don't act on it. And even now, as we sit here, I don't know. I don't know if it is okay to go back to Cambodia. I don't know if I am, because I don't know if I would do it again. I don't know if it's ethical to do.
Yeah, I realized I didn't really answer your question about what I would tell people to do. I think I probably would tell people to go and see that stuff if they're going. Like, it's hard to go there and ignore this big part of the history. Mm-hmm. Because, to go there and stay in the dark, is that better than to just be in the dark?
Yeah, no, I think it's better to go and see, what humans are capable of.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, though. At this point in time, I don't know how I would want to travel in Cambodia, so I don't know that I'm ready to go back there.
Mm-hmm. That's what I think. I think people need to act on logic. And so for me, I don't know right now if I think it's right to go back or not. But I think if I was going to go back, I would have to come up with some sort of suitable answer for myself.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So we're going to post photos from the temples of Angkor and maybe a link to Peter Cambodia's Facebook page. our driver from Phnom Penh, and a few other things on our show notes on theworldwanderers.com.
Yeah, check it out, and hopefully you enjoyed the episode.
Yeah, until next time.
Ciao.